first crack of thunder split the sky like a gunshot over the prairie, and old Caleb Turner figured the Lord was testing what little he had left, because the rain came down mean and sideways, hammering the broken shingles of his ranch house until water poured through the ceiling in silver threads, splashing onto the warped wooden floor he had stopped caring about years ago. He stood there with his hat still on his head, coat dripping, staring at the dark stains spreading above him, and he muttered that a man could fix a fence, mend a saddle, stitch his own wounds if he had to, but some things, like a roof and a heart, once they cracked wide open, never quite fit together the same way again. Caleb had been a hard rider once, known from the dry gulches beyond Amarillo to the cattle yards near Abilene. He could rope a steer at full gallop and drink any man under the table at the Silver Spur Saloon, but that was before the fever took his wife and left him with nothing but an empty rocking chair and a ranch too quiet for comfort. Since then he spoke little, worked alone, and let the roof rot the same way he let his sorrow rot inside him. The townsfolk said he was stubborn as a mule and twice as sour, and Caleb never bothered correcting them the morning after the storm. The sky cleared into a hard blue stretch of mercy, and Caleb climbed onto the porch, boots squelching in mud, looking up at the damage. Half the shingles were torn loose, beams showed through like broken ribs. He spat into the dust and decided he would get to it when he got to it, which meant never. He turned toward the barn, planning to saddle his horse and ride fence, but that was when he heard the rattle of wheels on gravel and the unexpected hum of a woman's voice drifting on the wind. She arrived in a wagon painted the color of summer cream, pulled by a steady brown mare, her hat tied beneath her chin with a faded blue ribbon, curls slipping free to dance around her cheeks. She hopped down with a toolbox in hand and eyes bright as prairie sunlight. She looked at Caleb like she had been expecting him all along, and she said her name was Eliza Hart, and she was in town fixing roofs for folks who could not manage on their own. She said it with a smile that did not ask permission, only offered help. Caleb stared at her like she had just proposed repainting the sky. He crossed his arms over his broad chest and told her he did not need charity, nor company, nor a stranger poking around his property. Eliza did not flinch. She walked past him toward the porch, boots crunching on gravel, and she tilted her head up at the sagging boards overhead. She let out a soft whistle and said that roof would not last another hard rain, and she added that she was not offering charity, she was offering skill, and skill, last she checked, did not insult a man's pride. There was something about the way she spoke, firm yet gentle, like she understood broken things without judging them. Caleb found himself following her as she circled the house, measuring with her eyes, tapping beams with the handle of her hammer. She explained how the storm had lifted the weakest planks first, how the nails had rusted clean through, how a little effort now would save the whole structure from collapse later. Caleb listened despite himself, because she spoke the language of repair like it was poetry, and he had not heard poetry in a long while. By midday she had climbed onto the roof without waiting for his approval, skirts tucked, boots steady, hammer ringing out sharp and certain across the prairie air. Caleb stood below holding a ladder he had not intended to fetch, watching her silhouette against the sun, each strike of her hammer echoing in the hollow spaces of his chest. He caught himself worrying that she might slip, might fall, might vanish the way everything else precious in his life had vanished, and that worry startled him more than her boldness ever had, as the afternoon stretched long and golden. Eliza climbed down, cheeks flushed, hands dusty but triumphant. She said it was only a start. The worst holes were patched, but the beams would need proper replacing soon. She wiped her brow and looked at him square in the eyes, asking if she might return tomorrow to finish what she had begun. Caleb opened his mouth to refuse, to retreat back into his lonely fortress of silence, yet the words tangled on his tongue, because for the first time in years, the house did not feel entirely empty, and neither did he. So he gave a slow nod, and in that small motion, something heavier than shingles shifted quietly inside his guarded heart. The next morning broke soft and pale over the prairie, and Caleb was awake before the sun cleared the horizon, standing on his porch with a mug of black coffee cooling in his hands, pretending he had risen early for the cattle, when in truth he was listening for the distant rattle of wagon wheels. He told himself it was foolish to expect a woman like Eliza Hart to return to a place as forgotten as his ranch. Yet when that familiar cream-colored wagon appeared at the bend of the trail, something in his chest loosened like a knot pulled free. Eliza stepped down with the same steady confidence as before, skirts brushing the dust, toolbox swinging at her side. She greeted him with a smile that carried neither pity nor intrusion, only purpose, and she set to work without ceremony. Climbing the ladder with planks balanced on her shoulder, Caleb could have left her to it, could have saddled his horse and ridden far from the sound of her hammer. But instead, he found himself hauling timber from the barn, setting it at the base of the ladder, holding each beam steady while she secured it in place. The rhythm of their labor filled the morning, hammer striking nail, wood meeting wood, boots shifting on weathered boards. Caleb felt the house tremble and strengthen beneath their hands, and Eliza spoke while she worked. Not idle chatter, but small pieces of herself offered like careful gifts. She told him her father had been a carpenter who believed anything broken could be mended with patience. She told him she had learned early that people were no different from houses. Both needed tending before rot set too deep. Caleb listened in silence. Yet each word settled somewhere inside him. By midday the sun burned high, and they rested beneath the shade of the porch. Eliza accepted the tin cup of water he offered without hesitation, and she studied the land stretching beyond the fences, asking him how long he had lived there. The question lingered between them, heavier than the heat. Caleb cleared his throat and answered that he had shared the place once, with a woman who loved wildflowers and laughter. He spoke her name quietly, as though saying it too loud might scatter it to the wind. Eliza did not interrupt, she simply listened, and for the first time in years Caleb did not feel foolish for remembering as afternoon shadows lengthened. Eliza returned to the roof beams, replacing the most fragile supports with new timber. She explained how the strength of a roof depended not only on shingles, but on the bones beneath them, how unseen beams carried the greatest burden. Caleb felt the truth of that settled deep. He had spent years patching the surface of his grief, burying himself in chores and solitude, yet he had never repaired the beams of his own heart. He had let sorrow hollow them out, until even the smallest storm threatened collapse while she worked above him. Caleb walked through the house, noticing details he had long ignored. The cracked window pane in the kitchen, the sagging hinge on the bedroom door, the dust layered thick on shelves where photographs once stood. He paused before the empty space on the mantel where his wife's portrait had rested. He had packed it away after the funeral, believing it hurt less not to see her smile. Yet the absence felt sharper than the memory, and he wondered if he had mistaken forgetting for healing. A sudden misstep on the roof snapped him from his thoughts. Eliza's boot slid against loose gravel, and Caleb lunged forward instinctively, gripping the ladder as if he could anchor her by sheer will. She steadied herself quickly, offering a sheepish grin down at him, but his hands trembled long after the danger had passed. He realized then that fear for her safety cut through him deeper than he expected. It was not merely concern for a stranger. It was the terrifying realization that he cared enough to be afraid again. When the final beam was secured, and the new shingles laid in careful rows, Eliza descended slowly, brushing sawdust from her sleeves. She surveyed their work with quiet satisfaction. The roof stood firm against the fading light, strong where it had once sagged. Caleb followed her gaze upward, then back to her face. The prairie wind tugged at the ribbon beneath her chin, and she asked softly if he would let her return one more day to seal the edges and ensure no rain could slip through. Caleb hesitated, not because he doubted her skill, but because he feared what might happen when the roof no longer required her presence. Yet after a long silence he nodded once more, knowing full well that what she was fixing now went far beyond wood and nails, and that frightened him more than any storm ever had. Dawn arrived quiet and gold on the third morning, spilling light across the prairie like a promise made, gentle. Caleb stood outside before the cattle stirred, hat low over his brow, hands resting on the porch rail that no longer sagged the way it once had. He had not slept much, not from worry of rain, but from the uneasy stirring inside him, the kind a man feels before a long ride into unknown country. When Eliza's wagon rolled into view, he felt both relief and something sharper, because he knew this would be the last day her hammer rang over his house. Eliza greeted him with that steady smile, though there was a softness behind it now, as if she too understood the weight of endings. She carried a bucket of tar and fresh shingles, explaining that sealing the edges mattered most. Storms did not always break through the center. Sometimes they slipped in quiet along the sides. Caleb held the ladder as she climbed, his palm firm against the wood, eyes never leaving her silhouette against the sky. The sound of her work was slower today, deliberate, each strike measured as though she was stretching time itself. The air smelled of pine and warm tar, of dust lifting under the sun. Caleb found himself speaking without planning to. He told her about the night the fever took his wife, how the doctor from town had ridden hard but too late, how the house had felt too large afterward, every room echoing with what was missing. He admitted he had stopped fixing things because it seemed wrong to mend a place that no longer held her laughter. The words came rough and unpolished, yet Eliza did not interrupt. She let him lay them out like broken boards ready for replacement when she climbed down for a short rest. She sat beside him on the porch steps, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. She said grief was like a storm that never asked permission. It tore through beams and left a man thinking the damage was permanent. But she believed love did not vanish with loss, it simply changed shape. She told him repairing his home did not erase his wife's memory. It honored it, because a place built on love deserved to stand strong. Caleb listened with his jaw tight, feeling something in him shift, not replaced. But steadied by late afternoon, the final shingle lay smooth and firm, sealed tight against wind and rain. Eliza climbed down slowly, boots thudding softly against the ladder rungs, and together they stepped back to look at the house. It stood proud against the open land, roof straight, beams hidden yet unyielding beneath. Caleb had lived under that roof for years without truly seeing it. Now it seemed different, not because of the wood alone, but because of the effort shared in raising it strong again. Eliza wiped her hands clean and began gathering her tools, each clink of metal against metal sounding to final. Caleb felt a tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with old sorrow. He realized he did not want her wagon rolling away down that dusty trail, leaving silence in its wake once more. He stepped forward, hat in hand, and told her he had paid her for the roof, but not for the patience she had shown, nor the courage she had given him to speak what he had buried. His voice faltered, yet he forced himself onward, saying the ranch had room for more than one pair of hands if she ever wished to stay. The wind stirred her curls as she looked at him, searching his face for doubt. She asked softly if he was certain he was not mistaking gratitude for something deeper. Caleb met her gaze steady and clear. He said he knew the difference between a patch and a foundation, and what he felt now was not a temporary repair. It was the start of building again. He did not promise grand things, only honest ones, shared work, shared sunsets, a house kept whole together. The prairie seemed to hold its breath as she considered his words at last. Eliza smiled, not the bright, fearless grin she had worn on her first arrival, but a warmer one, rooted and certain. She set her toolbox back down on the porch instead of in the wagon, and that small gesture carried more weight than any vow. Caleb felt the vast quiet of the ranch shift into something alive, not because the roof no longer leaked, but because the emptiness inside him had found company. The storms would come again. He knew that much about life on the prairie. Yet now the beams were strong, the shingles tight, and the heart beneath it all no longer stood alone. And as the sun dipped low beyond the open land, Caleb Turner understood that the woman who came to mend his broken roof had done something far greater. She had shown him that even the most weathered soul could be rebuilt, one careful nail at a time.